The bullet whistled past Cale's ear as he dove behind the overturned wagon, his horse already bolting down the dusty street. 3 men emerged from the shadows between buildings, their faces masked, but their intent crystal clear. They'd finally found him, Cale Riverton. The voice belonged to Dutch Morrison, a bounty hunter who'd been tracking him across 2 states. "You can't run forever." Cale's fingers found the grip of his Colt, muscle memory taking over as he assessed his situation. The town of Crimson Falls had seemed like just another stop to rest and resupply, but his past had caught up faster than expected. He rolled left, firing twice, sending Morrison's men scrambling for cover. That's when he saw her, a woman with auburn hair stepped directly into the crossfire, her hands raised but her chin defiant. She wore a simple blue dress that couldn't hide her determined stance, and her green eyes blazed with something between fury and fearlessness. "Stop this madness," she shouted, her voice carrying authority that made even the gunman pause. "This is a place of business, not a battleground." Morrison laughed harshly. "Step aside, lady. This don't concern you. Everything in this town concerns me." She moved closer to Cale's position, deliberately placing herself between him and the bounty hunters. "I'm Dr. Liana Thorne, and I won't have bloodshed in my streets." Cale stared at her, momentarily forgetting the danger. No one had ever stepped between him and a bullet before, not even his own family when they'd cast him out 5 years ago. Her courage was either inspiring or insane, possibly both. "Doctor," he called out, his voice rough from days of hard riding. "You need to get out of here. These men aren't interested in conversation." She glanced back at him, and something electric passed between them, a recognition that went beyond words. "Neither am I, apparently." Morrison's patience snapped.
"Ast!"
"Warning, Doc. Move or we'll move you." Instead of retreating, Liana stepped forward, her medical bag clutched like a shield. "Mr. Morrison, isn't it? I treated your brother last month for that infected wound. Saved his life, if I recall correctly." The bounty hunter's gun wavered slightly. "That was different, was it? Because I take an oath to do no harm, and allowing you to turn my town into a war zone would break that oath?" She gestured toward Cale without taking her eyes off Morrison. "This man hasn't hurt anyone here. It's been nothing but respectful since he arrived." Cale felt something shift inside his chest, warmth he'd forgotten existed. When had anyone ever defended him? When had anyone seen past the wanted posters and the whispered accusations? "You don't know what he's done," Morrison snarled. "I know what he's doing now," Liana replied firmly. "He's bleeding on my street, and as this town's doctor, that makes him my responsibility." Only then did Cale notice the wetness spreading across his shirt. Morrison's first shot had found its mark after all, creasing his ribs. The adrenaline had masked the pain, but now it throbbed with each heartbeat. "There's a reward on his head," Morrison pressed. $5,000. There's also a man who needs medical attention." Liana finally looked directly at Cale, her expression softening just enough to reveal the compassion beneath her fierce exterior. "Can you stand?" He nodded, though the world tilted slightly as he rose. Her hand found his arm, steadying him, and the simple touch sent shockwaves through his system. "This isn't over, Riverton," Morrison warned, but he was already backing away, his men following reluctantly. As the street cleared, Liana guided Cale toward a building marked with a medical shingle. "Welcome to Crimson Falls," she said quietly. "Now let's see about that wound." Liana's clinic occupied the ground floor of a 2-story building that had seen better days. But her medical supplies were meticulously organized and her hands steady. As she cleaned Cale's wound, he sat shirtless on the examination table, hyper-aware of her proximity as she worked. "This is going to sting," she warned, applying antiseptic to the bullet graze along his ribs. He didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. "Not the worst I've had. I imagine not." Her tone was neutral, professional, but her eyes held curiosity. "Want to tell me why Dutch Morrison and his men are so eager to collect on your bounty?" Cale studied her face, looking for signs of judgment. "Or fear?" He found neither. "Does it matter? To me? No? To this town? Maybe." She began wrapping his ribs with clean bandages, her movements efficient but gentle. Morrison mentioned $5,000. "That's serious money for serious crimes." I didn't kill anyone, he said quietly. I didn't ask if you did. She secured the bandage with practiced ease. But men don't usually run from places where they're innocent. The truth sat heavy in his chest, a burden he'd carried alone for 5 years. Sometimes innocent men run from places where they can't prove their innocence. Her hands stilled on his bandages. What happened? What? Before he could answer, the clinic. Door burst open. Young boy, maybe 10 years old, stumbled inside with tears streaming down his face. Dr. Thorne. Please, it's my sister. She's hurt bad. Liana immediately shifted into doctor mode, grabbing her bag and following the boy outside. Cale pulled on his shirt and trailed behind, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. The boy led them to a ramshackle house at the edge of town where a girl of perhaps 14 lay writhing on a bed, her face flushed with fever. Was grotesquely swollen, and dark lines radiated from what looked like a deep puncture wound. Snakebite, Liana diagnosed immediately. When did this happen? 3 days ago, the boy sobbed. We didn't have money for the doctor, so we tried to treat it ourselves. Cale watched as Liana examined the girl, her expression growing increasingly grim. The infection had spread too far, and the girl's breathing was labored. Without immediate intervention, she would die. I need to amputate, Liana said quietly to the boy. It's the only way to save her life. No. The boy grabbed her arm. Please, there has to be another way. Sometimes there isn't, Liana's voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes we have to choose between a hard truth and a beautiful lie. The words hit Cale like a physical blow. He'd been running from hard truths for 5 years, choosing the beautiful lie that he could somehow outrun his past. But watching this doctor face an impossible choice with courage and compassion, he realized that running had cost him everything: his family, his name, his chance at a real life. Do it, he said softly. Save her. Liana looked at him with surprise, then nodded. I'll need your help. Can you keep her still while I work? For the next 2 hours, Cale held the delirious girl while Liana performed surgery by lamplight. He watched her work with steady hands and unwavering focus, never hesitating even when the girl's screams grew weak and her pulse threadied. When it was over, the girl was alive but pale, her fever finally breaking. Liana cleaned her instruments with shaking hands, the first sign of vulnerability she'd shown. You did good, Cale said quietly. I cut off a child's leg. Her voice was hollow. How is that good? You saved her life. That's what matters. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Is that what you're trying to do? Save a life? I'm trying to figure out if it's worth saving. The admission surprised him. He'd never voiced the thought that had plagued him during long nights on the trail. Every life is worth saving, she said firmly, even ones that think they're beyond redemption. Their eyes met and held, and Cale felt something crack open inside his chest, a possibility he'd thought lost forever. Maybe, just maybe, he could stop running. The next morning brought trouble in the form of Mayor Cornelius Blackthorne, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his cruel nature. Stormed into Liana's clinic while she was changing the young girl's bandages, his face red with indignation. What in hell's name were you thinking, harboring a wanted criminal? He demanded, not bothering to lower his voice despite the presence of patients. Liana didn't look up from her work. I was thinking about my oath to do no harm. Your oath doesn't extend to murderers and thieves. He's neither. She finished, securing the bandage, and finally faced the mayor. And even if you were, I'm a doctor, not a judge. Cale stepped out from behind the supply cabinet where he'd been organizing. Medical supplies a task he'd taken on without being asked. If you have issues with me, Blackthorne, take them up with me directly. The mayor's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then stopped when he noticed Cale's stance. Years of running had kept him sharp, and it showed in the way he held himself relaxed. But ready. You've got 24 hours to leave town, Blackthorne snarled. After that, I'll wire the federal marshals. The marshals already know where I am, Cale replied calmly. They've known for months. If they wanted me badly enough, they'd have come themselves instead of leaving it to bounty hunters. This was a lie, but Blackthorne didn't know that. Mayor's uncertainty showed in his face.
Nice.
Nevertheless, Blackthorn continued, I won't have your kind in my town. My kind? Cale's voice carried a dangerous edge. And what kind is that? It's the kind that brings trouble? Blackthorn glanced meaningfully at Liana, the kind that gets innocent people hurt. After the mayor left, Liana and Cale worked in silence for a while. She was treating a rancher's infected hand while he cleaned instruments, both of them hyper-aware of the tension between them. He's not wrong, Cale finally said. About that trouble? He's wrong about you. She didn't look up from her work. I've seen enough men to know the difference between someone who causes trouble and someone who's been caused trouble. You don't know anything about me. No, you've been helping me treat patients for 3 days without being asked. No. You held that girl still while I saved her life. No. I know you stood between Morrison and this town even when you could have just kept running. She finished bandaging the rancher's hand and turned to face him. That tells me everything I need to. No. That afternoon, while Liana was delivering a baby on the other side of town, Cale found himself alone with young Timothy, the boy whose sister he'd helped save. The kid had been hovering around the clinic, too scared to leave his sister's side. You gonna leave? Timothy asked bluntly. Probably should, but you don't want to. Cale studied the boy's serious face. Why do you say that? 'Cause you look at Dr. Thorne the same way my PA used to look at my ma before she died, like she was the sun or something. The kid was too perceptive for his own good. It's complicated. Ma used to say that when grown-ups were scared to tell the truth. Timothy adjusted his sister's blanket with careful hands. She also said that running away never solved anything. Sometimes running away is the only option. Is it? Or is it just the easy one? Before Cale could answer, shouts erupted from the street. Through the window, he could see smoke rising from the direction of the livery stable. By the time he reached the scene, half the town was already there, forming a bucket brigade to fight the flames. Liana was in the thick of it, treating burned hands and smoke inhalation. She looked up when she saw him, relief flickering across her face. The stable. Owners trapped inside, she called out. Ow! The roof's about to collapse. Without thinking, Cale plunged into the burning building. The heat was overwhelming, smoke burning his lungs, but he could hear weak cries from the back stall. He found the stable owner, a grizzled old man named Jeremiah, pinned under a fallen beam. Can't move it, Jeremiah gasped. Cale braced himself and lifted, ignoring the fire that licked at his clothes. The beam was heavier than expected, and for a moment he thought he wouldn't be able to manage it. Then he thought about Liana, about the way she'd looked at him when she'd called him a good man. And strength flooded through him. He got Jeremiah out just as the roof caved in. Later, as Liana treated the burns on his hands, she was unusually quiet. Something on your mind, Doc? You could have died in there. So could he. That's not what I mean. She finished wrapping his hands and looked directly at him. You could have died, and I would have never known who you really are. That's better. Not for me. The admission hung between them like a challenge. I want to know, Cale. I want to know everything. That night, after the last patient had been treated and the clinic was quiet, Cale found himself sitting across from Liana at her kitchen table. She'd made coffee and waited, her hands wrapped around her mug, green eyes patient but determined. My real name is Cale Riverton, he began, the words feeling strange after years of aliases. 5 years ago, I was a deputy sheriff in Silver Creek, Colorado. She nodded encouragingly but didn't interrupt. I had a good life, a woman I was going to marry, respect in the community. Then the bank was robbed, and 15 people were killed, including the sheriff. His voice grew rougher. I was the only lawman who survived. Why did you run? Because I recognized one of the robbers. He was my brother. Liana's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee mug. Donovan had been trouble. Since we were kids, but I never thought he'd... Cale ran a hand through his hair. When the dust settled, money was missing from the evidence. A lot of money. Everyone assumed I'd taken it to help my brother escape. Had you? No, but I couldn't prove it. Donovan had vanished, and the evidence pointed to me. My fiancée turned her back on me. My friends, the people I'd sworn to protect, they all believed I was guilty. He met her eyes. So I ran. Figured it was better than hanging for a crime I didn't commit, and you've been running ever since. Until now. The admission surprised him. Until you. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Through the window, they could see torches moving through the streets. Angry voices carried on the night air. Lynch mob, Liana said grimly. Blackthorn's been talking to people, stirring them up. Cale was already reaching for his gun belt. I should go. No. She caught his arm. They're not thinking clearly. If you run now, you'll just prove their point. If I stay, someone might get hurt. Someone's going to get hurt anyway. At least this way you get to choose how. They could hear the mob approaching, maybe 20 men with torches and weapons. Cale checked his Colt, knowing it wouldn't be enough against those numbers. There's a back way out, Liana said. Through the medical supply room. I'm not running anymore. This isn't about running. This is about surviving to fight another day. No, he turned to face her fully. You said every life is worth saving. I need to know if that includes mine. Before she could answer, the mob reached the clinic. Mayor Blackthorn's voice boomed over the crowd. Riverton, we know you're in there. Come out and face justice. Cale moved toward the door, but Liana stepped in front of him. If you're determined to do this, then we do it together. Liana, no, this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I chose to help you. She grabbed her medical bag and a shotgun from behind the door. Besides, someone needs to patch up whoever gets hurt. They stepped outside together, and the mob fell silent. Cale could see the uncertainty in their faces. They'd expected to find a cowering criminal, not a man standing beside the town's beloved doctor. That's far enough, Cale called out, his voice carrying across the street. You want to talk? Talk! We want justice! Someone shouted from the crowd. Justice for what? I haven't hurt anyone in this town. You're a wanted man, Blackthorn said. A murderer and a thief. I'm a man who's been running from accusations for 5 years, Cale replied, but I'm done running. He began walking toward the crowd, his hands visible but ready. My name is Cale Riverton. I was a deputy sheriff in Silver Creek, Colorado, until my brother robbed a bank and killed 15 people. I didn't help him, and I didn't take the money. But I couldn't prove my innocence. So you admit you're a criminal? Blackthorn pressed. I admit I'm a man who made a mistake. I should have stayed and fought for my name instead of running. But I was young and scared, and I made the wrong choice. And now, the question came from Doc Peterson, the aging physician who'd been suspicious of Liana's new helper. Asking for the chance to make the right choice. The crowd was wavering, uncertain. Then a new voice cut through the night. Maybe you should listen to him. Everyone turned to see Dutch Morrison emerging from the shadows, his hands raised to show he wasn't drawing. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a man Cale hadn't seen in 5 years. His brother Donovan, looking older and harder, but very much alive. Because, Morrison continued, I've got something you all need to hear. The tension in the street was palpable as Donovan Riverton stepped into the torchlight. He looked like a man who'd lived hard for 5 years, scars on his face, gray threading. Through his dark hair and eyes that held the weight of terrible choices. Hello, brother, he said quietly. Cale's hand moved to his gun instinctively. Donovan. Before anyone gets trigger-happy, Morrison interrupted. You should know that, Donovan. Here came to me. Turned himself involuntary-like. Says he's got a story to tell. Mayor Blackthorn pushed forward. What kind of story? Donovan looked around at the assembled crowd, then fixed his gaze on Calais, the kind that clears an innocent man's name. 5 years too late, Cale said bitterly. I know, and I'm sorry. Donovan reached slowly into his jacket, producing a worn leather satchel. But I brought proof. Opened the satchel, revealing bundles of cash and a collection of documents. This is the money that went missing from the evidence locker. I took it, not Cale, and these papers prove it. Liana stepped closer, her medical training making her naturally suspicious. Kind of proof? Bank records. Correspondence with the gang I was running with. A confession I wrote 3 years ago but was too much of a coward to deliver. Donovan's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. Everything you need to know that my brother was innocent. Why now? Cale demanded. Why come forward now? Because I'm dying. Donovan's admission sent a murmur through the crowd.
No, Doc says, I've got maybe 3 months left, cancer, and I can't die knowing what I did to you.
The crowd was silent, absorbing this revelation. Morrison stepped forward, his demeanor professional. I've seen the evidence. It's legitimate. The federal marshals are prepared to drop all charges against Cale Riverton, just like that. Blackthorn's voice was skeptical. 5 years of running. And it's all forgotten? Not forgotten, Morrison corrected. Forgiven. There's a difference. Cale stared at his brother, emotions warring in his chest. Relief, anger, grief, and something that might have been hope. You destroyed my life. I know. I lost everything. My job, my fiancé, my reputation. Everything I cared about. I know. Donovan's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back 5 years. No, Donovan agreed. It doesn't. But maybe it gives you a future. The crowd was beginning to disperse. The excitement of a lynch mob replaced by the uncomfortable reality of a complicated situation. Cale found himself alone with Liana, Morrison, and his dying brother. What happens now? Liana asked. No, Donovan. Comes with me, Morrison said. There's still the matter of the bank robbery and those 15 murders. Being sick doesn't absolve him of that. I understand, Donovan said. I'm ready to face what I've done. He turned to Cale one last time. I know you can't forgive me. I wouldn't ask you to. But I need you to know that everything I did alone. You were always the good brother. Don't let what I did make you forget that. As Morrison led Donovan away, Cale felt hollow. The vindication he'd dreamed of for 5 years had finally come, but it felt empty. He was free, but free to do what? He'd spent so long running that he'd forgotten how to stand still. How do you feel? Liana asked gently. Lost. The honesty surprised him. I've been Cale Riverton, wanted fugitive, for so long that I don't. Know how to be Cale Riverton, innocent man? Maybe that's not the right question. What is? Maybe the question is, who do you want to be now? He looked at her, really looked at her. She'd stood by him when the whole town wanted his blood. She'd seen him at his worst, and somehow still believed in his worth. She'd given him something he'd thought lost forever hope. I want to be a man who deserves you, he said quietly. You already are, Liana, I don't. She placed a finger against his lips. Don't say anything you might regret tomorrow. This has been a long night, and you need time to process everything. She was right, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was something he'd already wasted. Too much of. 5 years of running, of hiding, of believing he was beyond redemption. He didn't want to waste another day. I need to tell you something, he said, about why I really stayed. I know why you stayed, do you? She smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. You stayed because you found something worth staying for. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Later, Cale stood in front of the mirror in his rented room, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. Today was the day he'd testify at Donovan's trial, and finally close the book on his past. But more importantly, it was the day he'd planned to ask Liana to marry him. A knock at the door interrupted his nervous fidgeting. Come in. Timothy entered, looking unusually serious for a boy his age. His sister had recovered well from her amputation, learning to walk with the wooden leg Cale had commissioned from the town carpenter. You look fancy, Timothy observed. Thanks, I think. You nervous about today? Cale sat on the edge of his bed a little. What about you? How are you feeling about testifying? The boy had witnessed part of the bank robbery in Silver Creek years ago, and his testimony would help establish the timeline of events. Scared. But Dr. Thorne says doing the right thing is usually scary. She's right about that. She's right about most things. Timothy fidgeted with his hat. That's why I came. To talk to you. Oh. I heard Mayor Blackthorne talking to some men yesterday. He's still not happy about you staying in town. Says you're a bad influence. Cale's stomach tightened. What kind of men? It's the kind that carry guns and don't smile much? Timothy's expression was grave beyond his years. I think he's planning something. Before Cale could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Through the window, he could see a group of riders approaching the clinic. Blackthorn was among them, along with several men Cale didn't recognize. "Stay here," Cale told Timothy, but the boy was already shaking his head. "Dr. Thorne is in there alone. She'll help save my sister." They reached the clinic just as Blackthorn was pushing through the door. Cale could hear raised voices, and his blood ran cold at the sound of distress in Liana's voice. "I don't care what papers you have," she was saying. "This is my clinic, and I decide who gets treated here." "It's not anymore," Blackthorn replied. "The town council has voted. You're harboring criminals, and that makes you unfit to serve as our physician." Cale burst through the door. Timothy closed behind. The scene that greeted him made his jaw clench with fury. Liana was pressed against the wall, her medical bag scattered on the floor, while Blackthorn's men ransacked her supplies. "That's enough," Cale said, his voice deadly quiet. Blackthorn turned with a satisfied smirk. "Ah, the hero arrives. Perfect timing. What's this about?" "This is about cleaning up our town. First, we remove the doctor who aids and abets criminals. Then we remove the criminal himself. I'm not a criminal. The charges have been dropped. Paper can lie. Character doesn't." Blackthorn gestured to his men. "Take him." What followed was brief but brutal. Cale was outnumbered, but 5 years of running had kept him sharp. He dropped 2 of Blackthorn's men before a rifle but to the head sent him to his knees. "Stop." Liana's voice cut through the chaos. "I'll leave. Just don't hurt him." "Too late for that," Blackthorn said coldly. "You've both caused too much trouble." That's when the door burst open again, and Dutch Morrison entered with 2 federal marshals. The bounty hunter's expression was grim as he surveyed the scene.
"Ayer."
"Blackthorn," Morrison said formally. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and corruption of public officials." "You have no authority here," Blackthorn blustered. "Actually, I do." Morrison produced a federal warrant. "Seems your brother-in-law in Denver has been talking about your business arrangements. Lots of interesting details about stolen cattle, forged land grants, and intimidation tactics." As the marshals arrested Blackthorn and his men, Cale helped Liana to her feet. She was shaken but unhurt, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am now." She touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the bruise forming on his cheek. "What about you? I'm tired of other people deciding my fate." He took her hands in his. "I'm tired of letting fear make my choices." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Liana Thorne. I'm saying I want to stay in this town and build a life with you. I'm saying I want to be the man you see when you look at me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too, Cale Riverton. I have since the moment you stood up to those gunmen, even knowing who I was, what I'd done, especially knowing who you are and what you've overcome." She smiled through her tears. "Now, are you going to kiss me, or do I have to take matters into my own hands?" He kissed her then, in front of half the town, with Timothy cheering and Morrison trying to hide a smile. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and promises, so second chances and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, Liana rested her forehead against his. "So what happens now?" "Now we build something worth staying for." 6 months later, Cale stood on the porch of the house he'd built with his own hands, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. The house wasn't fancy, but it was solid and filled with love. More importantly, it was home. "Coffee's ready," Liana called from the kitchen. He found her at the stove, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of his shirts over her nightgown. She'd never looked more beautiful. "Good morning, Mrs. Riverton," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Good morning, husband." Leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "Sleep well? Better than I have in years." Kissed her neck, marveling at how natural this felt. "Any patients expected today?" "Just the usual Mrs. Henderson's rheumatism, the Morrison baby's checkup, and I want to see how Timothy's sister is adjusting to her new leg." They'd been married for 3 months, and every day felt like a gift. Cale had taken over as the town's sheriff after the previous man had been found to be in Blackthorn's pocket. It was ironic that he'd ended up back in law enforcement, but it felt right. He understood justice from both sides, now as someone who'd enforced it and someone who'd been denied it. I got a letter from Morrison yesterday, Liana said, settling into his arms with her coffee. Donovan's trial is finished. Cale tensed slightly, and 25 years. He'll die in prison, but at least he'll have time to make peace with what he did. Any regrets? About testifying? No. About how long it took to get there? Every day. She turned in his arms, too. Face him. What about you? I regret a lot of things. And not coming here, not meeting you. Not learning that sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. A knock at the door interrupted them. Cale opened it to find Timothy, now 13 and working part-time at the clinic, holding an official-looking envelope. Mail for you, Sheriff, the boy said formally. Though his eyes were twinkling with mischief, Cale recognized the seal immediately. Federal Marshal's Office. His stomach tightened automatically, an old response to official correspondence. What is it? Liana asked, noting his expression. He opened the envelope and read quickly, his expression shifting from concern to amazement. It's from the Marshal's office in Denver. They're offering me a position as a deputy marshal. That's wonderful. Liana's excitement was genuine. It's a recognition of your experience and your character. I'd have to travel, be away from home for weeks at a time, and I've already done my time running around the country. I like being home at night with my wife. She smiled, but he could see the wheels turning in her mind. What if we could make it work for both of us? What do you mean? What if I applied? To be a traveling physician? Work with the Marshal's office to provide medical care in remote areas? We could work together. The idea was appealing, but Cale shook his head. It's dangerous work. I won't risk you. It's not your choice to make. Her tone was gentle, but firm. I've been taking care of myself for years. Besides, those remote areas need doctors more than anywhere else. Timothy, who'd been listening to the conversation with obvious interest, piped up, Could I come too? I'm getting pretty good at helping with medical stuff. Liana ruffled his hair affectionately. We'll see. You'd need to finish your education first. I could learn while we traveled, like an apprentice. Cale looked at his wife and the boy who'd become like a son to them, and felt his heart swell with possibility. A year ago, he'd been a man with no future, no hope, no family. Now he had not just a wife, but a calling, not just a home, but a purpose. All right, he said finally. Let's write to the Marshal's office, see if they're interested in a husband and wife team. And an apprentice, Timothy added hopefully. And an apprentice. Cale agreed with a laugh. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge, Liana took his hand. Any regrets about staying? Only that it took me so long to realize what I was looking for? What was that? A reason to stop running? A reason to believe I was worth saving? He squeezed. Her hand you gave me both. You had both all along. I just helped you see them. Maybe, but I know one thing for certain. I rode into this town with nothing, and you gave me everything. A home, a purpose, a future worth fighting for. We gave each other everything, she corrected softly. That's what love does. It multiplies what we have instead of dividing it. In the distance, they could hear the sound of the evening train pulling into Crimson Falls, bringing new travelers, new possibilities, new chances for redemption. But Cale no longer felt the urge to run toward that whistle. He had found his destination. So, what's next for us? Liana asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Next, we write our own story, together. Kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, the scent of home. No more running from the past. No more hiding from who we are. It's just building something beautiful from the pieces we've been given. Even the broken pieces. Especially the broken pieces. They're what make us strong. Above them, the stars wheeled. In their ancient patterns, witnesses to countless love stories that had played out under their light. But this one was theirs, a tale of a man who'd lost everything and found something better. Of a woman who'd seen past the surface to the heart beneath. Of a love that had transformed wounded souls into something whole. Cale Riverton had indeed rode into town with nothing. But Liana Thorne had given him a reason to stay, a reason to face his past, and most importantly, a reason to believe in tomorrow. And that, he thought, as he held his wife under the star-filled sky, was more than enough for any man to build a lifetime on,